possible, right?
So
I'm sorry.
Again, everything about it is crazy. So we're supposed to believe a guy with shorts on crawled on a fire hot metal roof up to the ridge cap with his bare arms and a t-shirt and bare legs. I don't know if you've ever been on a metal roof, but
oh yes, ma'am.
yeah. So I'm calling bullshit on that.
Yep.
Oh, and that was one of the things that they said. I saw in my repost. I should have tagged you guys in it. But it even said that that's one of the reasons. They said that there was no reason for having, someone from Secret Service up there because it was too hot. But yet this kid's wearing shorts and
Yeah.
Well, who was it? And as a matter of fact, I think in Signal, I may have just shared it with Bridget. Somebody out there has posted a 13-minute video of the body cam for the Butler County. And
yeah, I've seen it.
He pissed.
Yeah.
Like, he told the Secret Service that this building needed to be covered.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you caught what he said, because I listened to it a couple times when they were asking, well, where's the sniper team? Where's the sniper team? Oh, well, they're in the building.
Yep.
And they're like, well, what do you mean they're in the building? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which we knew they were in the building, but at least it acknowledged it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the sniper team sitting in the building having coffee, right? And then why, if the sniper team is in the building, why aren't they the ones coming out the door? Nobody came out the door.
Right.
So, I'm sorry. I have a metal pole barn, and I hear, there are cardinals up on the roof, and it sounds like a herd of buffaloes.
Right.
So you want to tell me that them sitting in the second-story room didn't hear that guy?
Right. Or the one that's
running.
Or the one that's running along the edge of it. I mean, they show the one guy on top of it running along the edge, and then another guy belly crawling. It's not the same guy.
No, it isn't. And it's like, at this point, it's like, okay, you legit think we're all stupid.
Well, hey, Cousin Ed, let me just say this. In their defense, we have been stupid for decades.
Wow, that may be the case.
Okay.
But you know what? This bitch ain't playing that game anymore.
Right.
It's like,
Right. All right.
Sorry.
Okay.
So, did you get your Rumble straightened out?
Huh?
Is your Rumble straightened out?
What do you mean straightened out?
Didn't you say something about StreamYard?
I was just downloading a StreamYard to make space. I'm only allowed 50 hours worth of content in the membership that I have. And so I had to download one of the episodes to save it so I could then replace it so I can stream over to Rumble.
Okay.
So, yes, I'm done with that. And we're live.
Right down. Well, hop to, woman.
I know. I'm waiting for you to shut up. So now she's feisty and getting on me. All right, I got it.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm overtired, right? And
okay.
I have like Dumb and Dumber here
to
work on the plumbing.
All right, feisty. Settle down. All right, everybody, please repost this so that we can get more people in here. I know it's Friday. Everybody's probably going to the bar. We are going to finish out Korea, and then we're going to have an awesome weekend. So the first article that I'm going to start off with is a Los Angeles Times article that was written back in 1998. And it is about, the name of it is called Soldiers' Cold War Ordeal Tied to CIA Link, Mysterious Leak. And it starts off with the setting is 1952. Hold on a second. Sorry, my dog's trying to eat my toes. John Arnold Jr. was talking to American military headquarters in Tokyo with 2 undercover CIA officers when one offered a warning. "You're a marked man now," he said. People who moved in the CIA circles did not go unnoticed by enemy agents, but Arnold felt no threat. He was not a spy. He was an obscure Air Force colonel, commander of an even more obscure flying unit tucked among sugarcane fields in the Philippines. Now, I want to make a couple of points here. We've been told repeatedly in most written, both in books and in articles, that MacArthur didn't allow CIA officers in his headquarters in Tokyo. And right here, we have 2 of them. So I just want to point that out. And also, one of the flying units that was active in North Korea area during the Korean War was flying out of the Philippines. And the article goes on, why would the communists bother with him? He learned why just a few weeks later from behind bars in a Chinese prison. And this article, the reason why I picked this goes to the heart of what I have said on here repeatedly. These bastards go into these war zones and do this shit. And then people like me and this guy who think they're flying just normal missions discover that the CIA has created a hornet's nest and you're flying right into it. China had discovered that the newly created CIA and the Air Force were collaborating on a new Cold War weapon called unconventional warfare. It was a group that's connections to the CIA was so sensitive that it remains a secret still to this day. Arnold commanded one arm of this clandestine group, which would make him an inviting catch, but it was compartmentalized and he had no idea the environment in which he was actually operating. It was minutes before midnight on January 12th, 1953, when Arnold and 13 of his men in a B-29 bomber, its belly painted black to match the night sky, was shot down over China's border with North Korea, where we're not supposed to be. They made headlines around the world when Washington eventually negotiated their release. But the story behind their ordeal, hidden CIA connection, is only now emerging from behind a veil. To his captor's surprise, Arnold knew few details about the CIA link. He knew enough, though, that the Chinese was convinced they had cracked an American espionage operation, and he knew enough to make his 2.5 years in prison a living hell because he was interrogated, tormented, deprived of sleep, abused, and humiliated. It remains unclear how China knew about Arnold and his unit before he was captured and convicted of spying, quote unquote, plotting to undermine the state was the exact charge. But evidence reviewed by the Associated Press suggests the Chinese knew everything. That in turn implies a breach of security that compromised one of America's earliest Cold War collaborations with the Air Force. Best known of its partnerships was the U-2 spy plane, whose CIA links was also exposed when Francis Gary Powers was shot down over the Soviet Union a few years later in 1960. And by the way, if you ever go back and look at that with your Gladio glasses on, you know damn good and well somebody outed him. Newly declassified government records support Washington's original claim that Arnold's plane was dropping propaganda leafs over North Korea when it was attacked, not spying as China insisted. But the papers reveal China was right on a more telling point. Arnold's group was part of a far-reaching CIA assault on China. Born in February 1951 and christened with the innocuous-sounding name Air Resupply and Communication Services, the group supported the CIA with specialized aircraft and crew that included air commandos trained in sabotage, demolition, hand-to-hand combat, and other guerrilla warfare skills at a secret CIA facility where? Fort Benning, Georgia, called Training Center 1. They helped the CIA in clandestine operations designed to subvert communism in its grand contest with capitalism. Yeah, that ain't what they were doing, but whatever. And not only in the Far East, where the ideological conflict was playing out in the Korean War. Yeah, that's not what it was either. The Air Resupply and Communication Services acronym ARC, ARC, was fitting. 3 ARC subgroups, known as wings, formed an arc around America's main foes, the Soviet Union, China, with bases in England, Libya, and the Philippines. A 4th base was planned for Alaska, but it never got opened. Now, think about that for just a second. England, which we know was home to a whole bunch of stay behind capability, Libya, and the Philippines, where we controlled their government for decades. The idea was to combat, not just contain, communism in ways short of a hot war. Thus, the ARC wings operated on 2 levels: a publicly admitted assignment of psychological warfare by dropping leaflets, and a secret mission to conduct unconventional warfare in support of the CIA. That included delivering CIA supplied weapons. Now, listen to this: supplied weapons for storage in parts of Europe for resistance groups to be activated in the event of Soviet invasion. What the hell? That should have Operation Gladio neon lights all around it, blinking red. Let me read that again. Their other mission included delivering CIA supplied weapons for storage in parts of Europe for resistance groups, i.e., Operation Gladio groups, to be activated in the event of Soviet invasion. That's what this entire mission was about: supplying Operation Gladio units all over the world. The acknowledged part of the ARC's work served as a convenient cover for the secret part. You know, just say we're flying PSYOPs missions, dropping pamphlets when we're actually putting weaponry in stay-behind units. It also felt to be important that the real purpose of these units was not made public. It was for this reason that the name Air Resupply and Communications was chosen, a name which has since served to confuse all not privy to its real mission. Each of these 3 ARC wings had about 1,000 men and an extraordinary complement of aircraft. Besides B-29s outfitted with airdropping agents and communicating with them behind enemy lines. What? They had amphibious SA-16 Albatross planes for covert landings on land and water. They had the C-119 flying boxcar transports and C-118 transports with their national markings erased for CIA-supplied crews. The ARC men were sworn to secrecy, and some still won't talk. I'm not interested in divulging anything more about this, says John Thompson of Hampton, Virginia, who was a scanner or lookout aboard Arnold's plane. Eugene Vadi, Vaadi, of Sarasota, Florida, who was the pilot in command of the B-29, says the accepted rule was you don't mention this even in your sleep. Vadi, who has the rare distinction of being shot down and imprisoned in 2 different wars. He was downed in Germany in World War II and basically declared killed in action. He recalled being asked to acknowledge in writing before deploying to the Far East in the summer of 1952 in the event of capture by communists we wouldn't be recognized by our government, and they weren't publicly until China provoked a U.S. response by announcing 22 months after their capture that Arnold and his crew had been convicted and imprisoned for up to 10 years. Washington called the spying charges false and the prison sentence the most flagrant violation of justice. With the Cold War over, some ARC veterans are willing to reveal glimpses of their special operations, risk dark of night flights behind the Iron Curtain to pick up defectors, infiltrators. For example, their covert air supply for French forces in Vietnam before the American public knew the existence of the U.S. involvement there. Norman Runge, R-U-N-G-E, of Bear, Delaware, flew C-119s and SA-16s from an ARC base in Libya. He said he ferried supplies to secret U-2 bases in Turkey and Pakistan in the mid-1950s. At the time, the cover story for the CIA's U-2 program was weather research. McElvin Mac Swah, S-W-A-H, of Tennessee, was among the ARC pilots who flew C-119 transports to Vietnam in 1953 and 54. And again, keep in mind, the Korean War went from 1950 to 1953. These people went immediately from Korea to Vietnam. No break. Got to keep that military industrial complex funding rolling. So they were there in support of the French forces. And keep in mind that they were actually fighting against not communists. They were fighting against nationalists that wanted Vietnam back as an entire country on their own without French colonialism. The planes first, but of course this article says they were fighting communists. The planes first were spirited through a hangar at Clark Air Base in the Philippines to replace their Air Force markings with French national insignia. So they're U.S. Air Force planes. They're painting on French insignia, and they had CIA hired civilian pilots for these missions. And you wonder where all of the Air Force funding goes. Another illustration of where you're not going to find these aircraft in the Air Force inventory anymore, so that shows as missing funds. My husband's getting ready to go to a car show, so my dog's going crazy. So just pay no attention to him. The ARC also trained CIA-hired civilian pilots for C-119 missions in Vietnam to support French forces in the decisive final months of the French war, according to George Pittman of Palm Bay, Florida, a former ARC squadron commander who conducted the training. Details of actual ARC operations are hard to find. ARC veterans say their unit did not always make written records because it was classified. It was a matter of this is a quote, "It was a matter of keeping it secret from the enemy, and in doing so, we kept it secret from everybody," said Edward Joseph of Arlington, Virginia, a retired Air Force colonel who commanded the super secret squadron of the 580th ARC Wing that trained guerrillas in the Libyan desert to drop CIA supplied weapons. Where? Oh, in the Balkans in 1950. There is little doubt the CIA masterminded the ARC. A top secret 1953 Pentagon report said Air Force unconventional warfare operations, including such covert activities as guerrilla warfare and subversion against hostile states, gave, quote unquote, maximum support to the CIA, unquote. The partially declassified Pentagon report says that in peacetime, targets of unconventional warfare were designated by the CIA. During wartime, target groups will be This is a quote. During wartime, target groups will be the USSR, satellite countries, and friendly countries overrun by the enemy, unquote. So friendly countries can be attacked by the CIA as long as the CIA designates there's an enemy in the friendly country. That's what they're saying. Michael Haas, a retired Air Force colonel who wrote a government-sanctioned report last year on the history of the Air Force Special Operations, cited a document that said the ARC program originated with a 1949 request by, quote, an agency outside the Department of Defense, unquote. Of course, that would be the CIA. His review of Air Force records, including some still secret, left no doubt which agency made the request. He says that it could only have been the CIA. The CIA believed its role was well hidden. The CIA apparently believed its hand was well hidden. It maintained only a small number of contacts or operatives in the 3 ARC wings. One was James Darby, D-A-R-B-Y, who in World War II had served in a clandestine unit called the Carpetbaggers. And I've read about these guys, which airdropped agents in Nazi-occupied France for the OSS, which was the forerunner to the CIA. Darby, now retired in Vero Beach, Florida, was the director of operations for the 581st ARC Wing at Clark in the Philippines. At the time, Arnold commanded the unit. He said CIA money helped finance some 581st operations. The CIA officer he recalled only by the name Hall would regularly accompany Darby to the unit's finance office to make cash deliveries. There were just a few of us who knew, Darby said. Arnold says he only recently learned of the extent of the CIA involvement from former colleagues of the 581st, including Henry M. Benjamin Jr., whom the Air Force listed as a B-29 gunner, but who revealed to Arnold before his death that he was one of the unit's CIA contacts. So let me just clarify that for you. This is a guy that was wearing a uniform as a CIA agent. I had known that some had associations with the CIA, but I didn't know which ones. And I didn't want to know, Arnold said. By shielding himself from such details, Arnold believed that he was staying, quote unquote, clean to fly some ARC missions and take risk, slight though he believed them to be, of falling into enemy hands. It was a fatal judgment that cost him dearly, but it was based on a principle he holds dear. Don't ask others to take risk you won't. Arnold was born and reared in Washington, D.C., the son of a government bureaucrat. He has a modest manner, a dry wit, and a sharp memory. At 84, he is not eager to discuss the past. Pain is plain in his haunted eyes as he recalls his captivity, visiting the Chinese for such a long period of time, as he puts it. A West Point graduate, class of 36, West Point was trained in meteorology and spent the decade of the 40s, including World War II, in the Air Weather Service. He yearned for a chance to command a fighting unit, and although the 581st did not promise actual combat, he saw it as a step in the right direction. After training for a year at Mountain Home Air Force Base, which is in Idaho, the 581st, with Arnold in command, quietly deployed to the Philippines in July of 1952. Shortly after, a second wing 580th deployed to Wheelis Air Base in Libya. It was responsible for operations in the Middle East and the southern flank of the Soviet Union. Third to deploy was 582nd, and it went to Molesworth, England, which is a Royal British Air Force base. It was responsible for all of Europe, including the satellites of the Baltics and Eastern Europe. The 581st area of responsibility was Asia, including the Russia Far East. In a coerced statement to his captors put on public display in 1954, Arnold described his mission as, quote, the main functions of the wing in time of war or at such times as may be directed by higher headquarters are to introduce special agents and guerrilla units into communist countries and communist-held areas, to supply by air delivery these personnel and guerrilla units originally operating there, and to keep in contact with them by radio for CIA. It operates under the cover of psychological warfare. This, unquote, this is Operation Gladio. He just made the statement. Arnold and others from his captured crew say that they had trained for such covert missions against China and the Soviet Union, but had not yet concluded any by the time they were shot down. Raindrops splattered on the tarmac at Yokota Air Base in Tokyo at dawn or at dusk in 1953 as Arnold and 13 other men in Air Force flight suits climbed aboard a refitted B-29 with the call sign Stardust 40. The mission plan for the Monday night called for Arnold's crew to spend a total of 28 minutes over 6 leaf drop areas in North Korea, then slip out of Korean airspace and return to Yokota. Arnold intended to fly back the next morning to the Philippines, where his wife had came to join him. As it happened, the crew dropped Korean and Chinese language leaflets on each of their first 5 targets and were at 22,000 feet, approaching the 6th, just south of the Yalu River, dividing China and North Korea, when searchlights from the ground suddenly lit up their bomber. With no fighter escort and only a pair of 50 caliber tail guns for defense, the plane was easy pickings for the fighters. By 11 p.m., the plane had lost radio transmission and made a mayday call. With the engines aflame, Arnold rushed to the rear to grab his parachute. Then he spotted the tail gunner, shot and apparently dead. The others managed to bail out as the plane plummeted to earth. By daylight, at least 7 of the men had been captured by Chinese troops and taken to the river city. Now, let me just point out something to you guys. They apparently were recovered not necessarily in North Korean territory. So there is some debate about exactly where they were captured from. So, if you're bailing out of an aircraft going down and you're not over North Korea, you're over China. After brief questioning, they were taken by train to a prison. The next stop was Beijing, known as Peking at the time, where they remained behind bars until their release at a Hong Kong rail station in 1955. An Air Force intel officer, Delk Simpson, who was stationed in Hong Kong, was the first to greet them. Close behind Simpson close behind were CIA officials because, of course, they want to debrief them. A few days later in Japan, the men were interviewed by Air Force team, including a CIA psychologist, John Gittinger, Gittinger. Arnold later was debriefed at CIA headquarters. In a cruel twist, Wallace Brown, who was the pilot on Arnold's plane, said the debriefing upon their return felt more like an inquisition. They were considered potential saboteurs, Brown said, for having been so long under the thumb of communists. Imagine that. You're asked to fly one of the most highly classified missions known at the time when we're supposedly in the middle of a war. For the CIA, you are shot down, you bail out, you spend 2 years in a prison, and your fucking government interrogates you like you're the enemy. For China, the Arnold crew offered a propaganda bonanza. They could be used not only to expose sensitive U.S. secrets, but also to humiliate the CIA, which deserves every freaking ounce of humiliation. An added bonus for the Chinese, one officer aboard the downed plane, Major William Baumer, Baumer, of Milton, Pennsylvania, was operations chief of the 91st Strategic Reconnaissance Squadron, which is not an ARC unit. And just for those who don't know, reconnaissance means spy plane. He had flown previous secret missions to monitor military sites in China and Russia. Bomber declined to be interviewed for this story. I bet he did. Moscow saw opportunity too. A secret KGB message dated 17 days after Arnold went down, addressed to the highest levels of Soviet security in Moscow, said the Chinese asked for help in organizing the crew's interrogation. The Soviet military intelligence advisor in Beijing was ordered by us to render help. Another message 4 days later informed the Soviet air chief in Moscow that he was receiving English texts of Arnold's interrogation and other material. We managed to take these items from the Chinese comrades, the note said. So, again, very interesting. As a colonel and wing commander, Arnold was a prize catch for his captors. Although he and his fellow prisoners were sometimes physically abused by the guards, Arnold says the Chinese pressure was mainly psychological. Most effective was solitary confinement, which of course is why they did that to the January 6th, because these bastards know all about this. They've done it before. He was isolated for nearly all of his 31 months in prison, awakened at odd times to undergo questioning, and made to stand rigidly for dozens of hours with his feet bound tightly. He was fed only minimally for a time, held in chains, and slowly forced both shoulder joints out of their sockets from being in the chains. In the early weeks of his confinement, guards aimed cocked pistols at him during his interrogation. This very much sounds exactly what happened in Vietnam. They threatened me with every kind of torture. Often he was in handcuffs that were so tight it cut off his blood. One of the things that they did come up behind me and press my fingers in the motion of milking a cow, and I can't even describe the pain. The abuse became too much. I was in the state that I could classify as a complete nervous breakdown. In a classified assessment of Arnold's crew conduct in captivity, the Air Force concluded that they endured more brutality, tricks, and contrivances than was encountered by any American held prisoner during the 3-year Korean War. The secret Air Force report praised the men's courage and staunchness of resistance, but none ever was given an official commendation. Some of them were kept on active duty. Some left. Arnold was assigned to Maxwell Air Force Base, where he never was given another command. Arnold was an early casualty of this business, said Darby, which is another ops officer. Even President Eisenhower offered little more than all good wishes in a reply to a private letter Arnold wrote 1 year after his return from China, in which he thanked the president for gaining the release of his crew. In drafting the reply for Eisenhower, an aide cautioned that laudatory remarks would not be appropriate given Arnold's quote unquote previous actions. These people are just bastards. I'm sorry. Arnold is not bitter, but he and his men paid a steep price to keep secrets, some of the Cold War secrets. A fate of 3 crew members, Lieutenant Henry Weese, W-E-E-S-E, and of San Bernardino, California, First Lieutenant Paul Van Voris, V-O-O-R-H-I-S, of Ozone Park, New York, and Airman Second Class Alvin Hart, Jr. of Saginaw, Michigan, has never been determined. China claimed they died in the shoot-down, although it never returned their bodies. Arnold believes Hart died on board because that was the bomber guy, the gun guy. One surviving crew member, Steve Kiba, K-I-B-A, told the AP that he saw Van Voris several times in prison months later. Arnold said he believes Weiss and Van Voris, the plane's radar operators, were given to the Soviets. In a letter to Van Voris's parents after Arnold and the others returned to the U.S., the Air Force said Van Voris, although he was observed to bail out of the aircraft, was never seen or heard from again, which was a clear, bold-faced lie because people that were in the prison saw him in the prison. It may never be known just when Beijing caught wind of the Ark secrets. George Pittman, a retired Air Force colonel who served with Arnold in the 581st, recalls that when the wing moved, supposedly in total secrecy, from its Idaho training base to Clark in the Philippines in 52, Chinese and Russian periodicals that say that the wing's intelligence officer had been receiving, signals that the intelligence officers had been receiving turned up at Clark before the men even arrived there. That tells you that they knew what was going on. How they knew is unclear. Joseph, the 580th Squadron commander, said the CIA concluded in its assessment of the damage done by the defections of British spies Donald McLean and Guy Burgess in May of 1951 that they had passed Ark secrets to Moscow. The two Britons apparently had received this information from Harold Philby, Britain's top intelligence officer in Washington, who later defected to the Soviet Union. The Air Force began to dismantle the Ark program in 53, basically after the war. And let's see. It lists the other people, which I think we need to recognize. The 11 U.S. airmen who returned from captivity as Colonel John Arnold, Major William Balmer, Captain Eugene Valdi, Captain Elmer Llewellyn, First Lieutenant John Buck, First Lieutenant Wallace Brown, Tech Sergeant Howard Brown, Airman First Class Steve Kaiba, Airman Second Class Harry Benjamin, Airman Second Class Daniel Smith, Airman Second Class John Thompson, and the three crew members that went missing was Lieutenant Paul Van Voris, Lieutenant Henry Weiss, Lieutenant and Airman First Class Alvin Hart, the gunner. That's the end of this. But I do want to also say that when you look at air crews, you have a captain that is the aircraft commander. Okay, so that means he's flying. You have an instructor pilot that's a major, but your aircraft observer is a first lieutenant, which means he's been in like 2 years, 2 to 4 years. You have, even back then, because those timelines have not changed, First Lieutenant Wallace Brown is a pilot, again, 2 to 4 years. The tech sergeant, which, could have been in anywhere from 10 to 20 years, everybody else, all of the rest of the enlisted crews, the radio operator, the aircraft observers, 3 of them, all airmen second class, which means they're in their first 4 years of even being in the military. They didn't even get seasoned veterans to fly these missions. They put these people at risk, and they're basically all newbies. It's disgusting from a military perspective. Totally disgusting. Okay, we're going to jump right in. I know that's a lot of heavy shit, but I want to go to this next thing, and we're going to run over a little bit because I want to get this done today, because this next article talks about us actually in Korea prior to, and it's very important, prior to the actual shoot. It's a lot. We may actually have to do Monday still doing this because there's just so much. But this is so important because it talks about how the whole thing was set up. Let me see what this other one is. We already did that one.
Yeah, we did a lot of damage in Asia. So if there's any question as to why there's a lot of animosity between China and the United States or any of these Asian countries, you have to remember that that's why.
So I'm gonna save this one for Monday, and I'm gonna do a shorter one that is still very important. It's a more recent one, and then we'll go back and do the longer one first thing on Monday because I don't want to shortchange it. This article is about the Reverend Moon, cult leader, CIA asset, and friend of the Bush family. And it actually has a picture of Reverend Moon and his wife with George and Barbara Bush. And this article was September 2012, and it's talking about the death of Reverend Sun Moon Moon. Hopefully ends one of the strangest chapters of the U.S. security industrial complex. It didn't, by the way. The self-proclaimed messiah who owned dozens of businesses, including KAHR Arms. Yeah, like an arms company, like ammunition, guns, arms company. And who once claimed to preside over Jesus's wedding posthumously in order to get the Christian savior into heaven, was ultimately a front for the US CIA and people like George Bush. Moon founded the Washington Times newspaper in 1982. Now, he is a CIA asset, and he founded a newspaper. And let's see, in 1982, and the Washington Post went out of its way to avoid any mention of the dark side of Moon upon his death on Monday, September 3rd, 2012 at 92, because of course the Washington Post is part of the CIA Mockingbird as well. When George W. Bush faltered in New Hampshire in early 2000, it was Moon's shadowy cultish right-wing network that came to its rescue in South Carolina. Moon's forces helped turn an certain primary defeat into a double-digit victory by spreading Moonies, his zombie-like followers, throughout the state. As of Washington Post reporting, quote, an array of conservative groups have come to reinforce Bush's message with phone-based radio ads and mailings of their own, unquote. Now, I have to say this because when you read through this, you got to be thinking Jim Jones in San Francisco, because between Jim Jones and his church, if you go from LA to San Francisco, and he had large contingents of his church in both places for the Democrat Party, you could read this exact same thing and it applied to them. So just keep that in mind. Meanwhile, Moon's Washington Times ran the headline, quote, Bush scoffs at assertion he moved too far right, unquote. The bizarre, almost unbelievable political alliance between the Bush family and Reverend Moon is one of the dirtiest little secrets the CIA has. To understand the historical significance of Reverend Moon and his Moonies, one must start with the Ryoichi Sakakawa, identified in the 1992 Frontline Investigative Report as the key money source behind Moon's far-flung world religion and his business empire. Sawakawa begged to Time magazine that he was the world's richest fascist. In 1930, Sakakawa was one of Japan's leading fascists. He organized a private army of 1,500 men equipped with 20 warplanes. His followers were Japan's version of Mussolini black shirts, or the white shirts that we just talked about in Korea, or there's a whole laundry list of them. These are all Operation Gladio, guys. Sakakawa was a key figure in leading Japan during World War II and was an uncondemned Class A war criminal, meaning he didn't stand trial. Following World War II, I'll get to that in a minute. According to the U.S. documents, Sakakawa was suddenly freed with another accused war criminal, Kodama. And if you guys go back to our Golden Warrior, you'll know all about Kodama. Kodama was huge. These are the guys like Reinhard Gehlen that got off without being held accountable, or Otto Skorzeny. A prominent figure in Japan's organized crime syndicate, the Zakuza. They were freed in 1948, 1 year after the National Security Act established the CIA as the successor to the OSS. In January 1995, Japan's news service uncovered documents establishing that Kodama's release coincided with an agreement he had made with the U.S. military intelligence 2 months earlier to serve as an informant. declassified documents link Kodama's release to the CIA. During World War II, Kodama's activities, according to the U.S. Army intelligence records, consisted of systematically looting China of all of its raw materials and dealing in heroin, drugs, tungsten, gold, industrial diamonds, and radium. Both Sasakawa and Kodama's CIA ties are a reoccurring theme with Reverend Moon. In 1997, Congressman Donald Frazier launched an investigation into Moon's cult. The 444-page congressional report alleged Mooney involvement with bribery, bank fraud, illegal kickbacks, and arms sales. Oh, look at that. He sounds like an Operation Gladio guy. The report revealed that Moon's 20,000-member Unification Church was a creation of the Korean Central Intelligence Agency. I would like to say I'm shocked that there's a religion posing as, or a terror group posing, or intel group posing as a religion, because that's exactly what Jim Jones was too, and many others, by the way. The Moonies were working with KCIA director Kim Jong-il, PHIL, as a political instrument to influence U.S. foreign policy. The U.S. CIA was the agency primarily responsible for founding the KCIA during World War II. Moon's organization has denied any link to intel services. Moon, who is Korean, and his two fascist Japanese buddies, Kodama and Sasakawa, worked together in the early 1960s to form the Asian, you guys aren't going to believe this, the Asian People's Anti-Communist League, which is the Japanese version of the World Anti-Communist League that was formed in Taiwan, that support all of Operation Gladio, with the aid of KCIA agents. The League allegedly used Japanese organized crime money and financial support from Chinese Chiang Kai-shek. Oh my God. I'd like to say I'm shocked, but I'm not. The League concentrated its efforts on uniting fascists and right-wing militants into this anti-communist force, better known as Operation Gladio. In 1964, League funds established Moon's Freedom Center in the United States. Kodama served as a chief advisor to the Moon's subsidiary Win Over Communism, a nonprofit that served as a conduit to protect Moon's South Korean financial investments. Sasakawa acted as Win Over Communism's chairperson. In 1966, the League merged with another fascist organization called Anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations. And we'll get into them. There's a whole nother story on those guys. The merger begat the what? World Anti-Communist League. Later in the 1980s, the retired U.S. Major General John Singleb, better known as CIA agent, not a general, another one in a military uniform that's really a CIA agent, emerged from the shadows of the League, meaning the Anti-Communist League, to become caught up in what? Oh, the Iran-Contra scandal. As chairman of the World Anti-Communist League, chairman, let me say that again, chairman, Major General John Singleb is the chairman of the World Anti-Communist League, which is a front for Operation Gladio. And the CIA, by the way. Singleb enlisted soldiers of fortune and other paramilitary groups to support things like the Contras in Nicaragua and many others. Moon's Freedom Center, you know, the one in the U.S. where the CIA is not allowed to operate except for the Moon is a CIA agent, served as the headquarters for the League in the U.S. Oh, so the CIA is using a religion in order to hide Operation Gladio inside the United States. During the Iran-Contra hearings, the League was described as a multinational network of, and I'm quoting, Nazi war criminals, Latin America death squad leaders, North American racists, anti-Semites, and fascist politicians from every continent, unquote. That's a quote describing Operation Gladio. Working with the KCIA, Moon made his first trip to the US in 1965 and shockingly obtained an audience with who? Oh my God, President Eisenhower. I would love to say I'm shocked, but I'm not. Ike and former President Harry Truman lent their names to letterhead of the Moon-created Korean Cultural Freedom Foundation, which is another CIA front. In 1969, Moon and Sasakawa jointly formed the Freedom Leadership Foundation, another CIA front, and pro-Vietnam organization that lobbied the US government on behalf of going to war. You know, the thing that CIA loves to do to hide their drug activity. In the 1970s, Moon earned notoriety in the so-called Koreagate scandal. Female followers of the Unification Church were accused of entertaining and horizontally lobbying, I love that line, US congressmen while keeping confidential files on all of those that they lobbied at the Washington Hilton Hotel rented by the Moonies. He was running a blackmail scandal or ring. The US Senate held hearings regarding Moon's programmatic bribery of US officials, journalists, and others as part of an operation by the KCIA, but they're actually the CIA. The Fraser Report documented that Moon was paid by the KCIA to stage demonstrations at the UN and run pro-South Korea propaganda campaigns. The congressional investigator for the Fraser Report said, "We determined that the Moonies' primary interest in at least the US was not religious at all, but political." Duh. After Ronald Reagan's victory in 1980, Moon's political influence increased dramatically because Vice President George Bush, former CIA director during the whole recruiting of Moon into the CIA, was now vice president. Bush and Moon shared unsavory links to South America's underworld figures. Hello, Operation Gladio, Operation Condor. In 1980, according to the investigative magazine IF, the Moon organization collaborated with multiple right-wing military coups in many different countries, but specifically Bolivia, that established the region's first narco state. Moon's credentials soared in conservative circles. And let me also just say, they were in Paraguay too. And why is that important? Because Paraguay is host to like 100,000 George H.W. Bush, quote unquote, ranch, where there's a lot of airstrips on that ranch and a lot of alleged poppy growing on that ranch in Paraguay. In 1982, with the inception of the propaganda tabloid, The Washington Times, Vice President Bush immediately saw the value of forging an alliance with the political powerful Moon organization. I'm sure he crafted the whole damn thing. An alliance that Moon claims made Bush president. One former Mooney website claims that during the 1988 Bush-Dukakis battle, Reverend Moon threatened his followers that they would be moved out of the United States if Dukakis won. Moon himself had clean hands. He didn't have clean hands, sorry. Moon was convicted of tax evasion in 1982 and spent a year in the U.S. jail. Also in 82, Moon's organization, based at Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio, helped elect John Kasich, now Ohio's governor, in the U.S. Congress in the 12th District during the Gulf War. The Mooney-sponsored American Freedom Coalition organized support for troop rallies throughout the country and helped other congressional members. The Frontline documentary identifies Washington Times as the most costly piece of Moon's propaganda arsenal, with losses estimated as high as $800 million. Still, the documentary asserts that his old friend Sasakawa virtual monopoly over the Japanese speedboat gambling industry allowed money to continually flow into Moon's coffers. The Bush-Moon connection caused considerable controversy in 1995 when the former president announced he was spending nearly a week in Japan on behalf of a Mooney Front organization called the Women's Federation for World Peace, founded and led by Moon's wife. Bush downplayed accusations of Mooney brainwashing and coercion. The New York Times noted that Bush's presence was seen as lending the group legitimacy. Longtime Mooney members S.P. Simmons wrote an editorial for the Portland Press, noting that Bush didn't need to report $1 million paid by Moon and were well aware of the church's history. Other news sources placed the figure of the former president's presence at $10 million. Bush shared the podium with Moon's wife and addressed the crowd of 50,000 in Tokyo's Dome. Bush told the faithful Reverend and Mrs. Moon are engaged in the most important activities in the world today. Yes, to keep them in power. They were. It's called Operation Gladio. The following year, Moon bankrolled a series of family values conferences from Oakland to Washington, D.C. The San Francisco Chronicle reported that, quote, in Washington, Moon opened his checkbook to the Republican Party mainstays as former President Gerald Bush, George Bush, GOP candidate Jack Kemp, and Christian Coalition leader Ralph Reed, unquote. Purdue University professor Anson Swope, longtime moon watcher, said, quote, the man accused of being the biggest brainwasher in America has moved into mainstream Republican Americana. Moon proclaimed as his family value conference that he was the only one who knew, quote, all the secrets of God, unquote. One of them, according to the Chronicle, was the husband is the owner of his wife's sex organs and vice versa. President Ford, President Bush, who attended the inaugural World Convention of the Family Federation for World Peace, you all are distinguished guests. You're famous, but there's something that you do know now, the Chronicle quoted Moon, quote, is there anyone here who dislikes sexual organs? Until now, you may not have thought it virtuous to value those sexual organs, but from now on, you must value them, unquote. In November 1996, Bush the Elder arrived in Buenos Aires, Argentina, amid controversy over a newly created Spanish-language Moon weekly newspaper called Tipos del Mundo. Bush smoothed things over as the principal speaker at the paper's inaugural dinner. The former president then traveled with Moon to neighboring Uruguay to help him open a Montevideo seminary to train 4,200 young Japanese women to spread the word of the Unification Church around Latin America. The young Japanese seminarians were later accused of what? Laundering $80 million through Uruguay Bank because they were actually runners. They were not spreading the word of God. The Times also reported that when Reverend Jerry Falwell's Liberty University faced bankruptcy, Moon bailed it out with millions of dollars. In 1997, the New York Times wrote that Moon has been reaching out to conservative Christians in this country in the last few years, emphasizing shared goals. Blah, blah, blah. And in 1999, the Washington Post reported the cult leader owned the lucrative KAHR arms company through a cutout called SAEILO Incorporated. It's a shadow network around the Moonies and the CIA that helped propel George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush to presidency. Recently, the Messiah's newspaper, that's the name of it, was spent most of its time attacking, he claims he's the Messiah, I should have said. It spends its time attacking President Obama. Besides the Washington Times, the Unification Church had business holdings including the United Press International, UPI. Yeah, he owned that telenews service as well. Moon was often shown in the mainstream media presiding over mass marriages of his followers. More importantly, was his marriage of convenience to the CIA and Bush family. The end. So had to get that in because this really kind of ties the knot in the connection between Operation Gladio in Asia and in the US, and how basically they're just in bed with each other. So I'm going to have to do on Monday a final Korea where we can get to this other one, because again, I don't want to leave it out. It is critically important to the setup of what we've already learned about Korea. So with that,
it is insane. Sorry, sometimes I'm just dumbfounded at some of the research that we stumble on with, okay, you know, the Paraguay property that Bush owns. Well, yeah, as it turns out, not only does he own 100,000 acres, that's not the same as an acre. That is like a 3D acre. And the Reverend Moon also bought 600,000 acres. Okay. Combining the fact that they were best buds, you know, I mean, this is just so dirty. And even the CIA's very website says this is the center, Paraguay is the center for drug trafficking, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just dumbfounded sometimes.
So what you have to keep in mind is this was being done in the aftermath of losing Vietnam. So when the control of it, I mean, they still buy drugs and opium from the Golden Triangle, but you know, they moved that to Afghanistan, and then we went through the whole initial back in the day Afghanistan, not the recent Afghanistan. And then they moved that entire operation when they lost control of the Golden Crescent because of some crackdowns and the Shah leaving Iran because he got overthrown, blah, blah, blah. And the original Afghanistan thing winding down. So they still had to find another area. And that is timing wise where you find this large scale opium expansion in South America and the setting up of the cartels expanding, because they already had some of the cartel structure in when they lost Cuba, because Cuba was their port into the United States. And that's why the CIA tried their damnedest to get Cuba back, because Fidel Castro cut them off once he took over, and they lost their port into the United States because they launched all of the ships coming into the Miami port, the New York port, New Jersey, all along the coast there, New Orleans, out of Cuba. And when they lost that, that was a huge, big financial cost to them, because that was really cheap. When they had to use the overland route through the Darien Gap and all of that, and coming up through Mexico, you got to pay a lot more people. So that became a lot more costly to them. And they wanted, if they could, to get Cuba back. They did try doing other islands. In large part, that's what Grenada was about. And there were others, Turks and Caicos. They just never were able to get a big enough operation set up on any of the other islands. Go ahead, Miles.
Well, good afternoon, Colonel.
Good afternoon.
I learned so much in your classroom. I didn't realize there was so much horizontal influence in the world, but now it makes sense that the DNC is running a horizontal candidate.
Yes.
Priceless.
Definitely came right back around, didn't it? Love it. Time traveler, you had your hand up, now it's gone. Did you have something you wanted to say? Yes, no? I don't know. Maybe we could drop her down.
Yeah. Maybe we'll drop her down and bring her back up.
Yeah. Stellar, how are you?
mind blown again. Just how, like what Miles was just saying, how all these things are intertwined amongst each other, and confirming that these people freaking don't even have souls. Just disgusted.
Yeah. Yeah, they sold their soul, that's for sure. So they definitely sold their soul.
I mean, and then, was it Bridget who was talking about Paraguay, and that's even on their website and everything? It's almost like it's a badge of honor. It's unbelievable.
But see,
I mean, oh my gosh.
That's what I'm
saying. The same people.
But that's what I'm saying. All of the information is out there if you have your glasses on. Just like those articles that I was reading today. If I would have read those articles 10 years ago, I would have glossed right over the most critical part. And they're saying out loud that those are stay behind units. We just didn't know what they were. And that they are setting up throughout the North Korea. We definitely established that, and South Korea for that matter, that they did that they had weapon stashes. The whole purpose of that arc wing, 3 wings. That's a lot of planes, by the way, just for you guys that don't know that. 3 of them were commissioned to do nothing but set up Operation Gladio's weapon stash deliveries. That's mind-boggling to me. So, anyway.
And it's unbelievable. And I'll make you a bet that this Resorts World International thing is probably tied in with all the embezzling and I guess the sports book. So that's the gaming. And they're not just here, they're all over the place on cruise ships, high-end resorts, various places throughout the world.
Stellar. Resorts International was a front company for money laundering. So here's how it worked. When they sold drugs, they got cash at the end of the pipeline, right? So the guys that are selling them on the streets get cash. It's all cash transactions. Those cash transactions got delivered in a bank. Those banks had banks and banks. And so about 3 levels of bank transfers were made. And then that final bank, like Castle Bank, which was created and basically ran by Paul Helliwell, CIA asset, he would take those and they had runners, i.e. realtors, i.e. private equity in Miami, all over, and not all over the country, but let's just say Miami, because a lot of it went to Miami. And they had these people whose entire businesses was set up to buy real estate. The Resort International was set up. They bought a front company, that paint company, Mary Carter Paint Company, and then they created the conduit to funnel them money. And they started like in creating trust and other companies, and then they changed the name to Resort International, and then Resort International had all of this commercial property and all of these single family homes, and the damn thing just kept growing and growing. And I have all these hotels and then all these casinos, and that was all bought with drug money. The entire thing is part of Operation Gladio.
And how convenient that they have cruise ships too. Hello.
Human trafficking.
Insane. Human trafficking, exactly. Children's, all that other stuff. And I'll bet you that there's going to be tie-ins with Chase Bank and stuff like that. All of the big banks are going to be in charge because, they have to have their banking systems as well. And then that kind of ties into, like they were saying, that Epstein's Island wasn't only just like torture for children and those, the sexcapade with the sickos, but it was also to meet with like Chase and a couple of other ones, as well as like those, like you were talking about, the equity funds and stuff like that for the back, or the second ledger or the back ledger.
Well, he had his own private equity, and that's how they did that. That was part of the money laundering chain. Yeah. Bridget, go ahead.
Just to put it in perspective, let's see, in 2008, and we talk a lot about patterns. and them using, like in recent weeks, months, we've heard about not just how Biden was corrupt, but how it transferred over into his brother and his nephews and his nieces and his son and so on and so forth. Okay, in 2008, this article was talking about Neil Bush, okay, and that is, of course, President Bush's brother, how it was involvement in the Silverado Savings and Loan debacle, also how his divorcee, Sharon Bush, was also involved in Hurricane Relief Foundation that was also involved in money laundering, or caught in money laundering, and how they are part of a group located out of Texas called Ignite, which sells curriculum to schools. Okay, so now you see how this whole thing is just one big long vein that goes round and round and round. And you can't just stop at the person involved. You always have to check on their family and their extended family and their friends and their extended family of friends and so on. Thank you.
Miles, go ahead.
Yeah, I remember the Moonies back in the day. Before I had glasses that you brought me, I had this gut feeling about weirdos. Oh, that's that strange word that they're calling us now. And then I would look at who the weirdos would hang out with, and I had a feeling about those guys. So I guess moving forward here, I'm trying to tell people that something's happening because they're just getting psyops to get black-pilled all the time. And guys, if we weren't winning on different fronts, we would be talking here right now. We'd still be dealing with No Name. He'd be running around. And we wouldn't see these different rulings that are coming out. It was huge yesterday what happened in Georgia, the Chevron difference, all these different things. Just write them down, check them off, and remember that we are going to win this. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Miles. And I do want to say one thing, and then I'll get to Carrie and then Renee. I got a text message. So for those of you who know who Badlands Media is, and Alpha's on there, Can Con, Red Pill 78, and all of those guys. I've been on many of their shows talking about Operation Gladio, breaking history. They're having the Great America Restoration Tour that just started this today for the weekend out in South Dakota. I could not go because, of course, my new grandbaby. I will be going to the one they're having in Myrtle Beach, though, just FYI. However, I did get a text. They were an hour and a half into the presentations that they do, and Operation Gladio had already been mentioned a whole bunch of times. So I just want everybody to know that we have carried and created a wave. I don't know how big the wave is, but collectively, everybody in this room, everybody that goes on to our Rumble channels, everybody that goes and reposts with hashtag Operation Gladio that supports Alpha Warrior, and everybody that has me on their show, God bless each and every one of you, because we are making a difference. That the Y-Files had a show of Operation Gladio. Nobody ever said the word Operation Gladio in America until we started talking about it. And that's a pat on the back to everybody in this room, everybody that will hear this later, that repost our information. Our information is getting out, and it is making a huge difference. So thank you to all of you. Please keep it up, and God bless you. Carrie, go.
Yeah, I just get really confused. Maybe you can help me sort this out. don't understand why a normal person steps up into the CIA and carries bags for the elite. I don't understand why anyone poor would work for these absolutely unethical. I mean, even someone that's challenged with challenged intelligence would understand that it's not ethical what they're doing. I just get lost on that. I was at a conference and sitting at a table with this Brookings Institute guy. Other people were there, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm doing a study. I'm working on a study that we've determined that the reason 9/11 happened was because those poor Arabs, they did it. They're responsible." And I just laughed at him. But now I'm thinking, oh my God, like, where's my differential for this? I always put it on money, but I don't know. I need help.
Well,
Help me, Colonel. Help.
Here's what I'm going to say. When you grow up in a silo, and I don't mean on a farm, an information silo, which many people, especially the ones that are in the system now, the CIA is having a huge recruiting issue, and so is the military, and so is the FBI. They're dying right now. So I think we've already rounded the curve to answer your question. But in the past, and I can certainly talk about the people in the 70s and 80s, because that's when I enlisted. The people that went in because they thought they were doing something noble. And once you get in, you are in a silo. You are going to hear primarily the information they want you to hear. And you are in a propaganda campaign to reinforce the fact that what you're supporting is good. So it is almost impossible once you're on the inside to be able to see the inside for what it really is. I'm not kidding. It is almost impossible. There are now, because of the internet. So we say that in a day and age where 20 years ago, we didn't have all of the information that we have today. So I can agree with you if you look at it only in the context of today. In the past, and then you have these people, these poor people, like some of my best friends, who are just now pinning on Colonel, and they are stuck between a rock and a hard place. Do they throw everything that they have done their entire life? I mean, like literally right out of high school, they went to the academy or they went to college, they joined the Air Force, they made colonel. Do they give that up? And do they give that up and walk away from it? Or do they, if they only have 18 years and they don't qualify for retirement until 20, do they throw 18 years of service away because they found out that the people they work for are evil bastards? Those people all have to make that decision themselves. I do know people that have walked away short of retirement. They resigned their commission. And God bless them. That was the choice that they made. There are other people that I know that are trying to stick around and make it without getting a vaccine to their retirement. But that is something that they all have to do. I think going forward from here, there's a completely different story. And I know people like myself and a lot of my peers are telling their kids unequivocally, do not go in the military until shit changes. I mean, my next door neighbor, God bless him, is the grandson of my original neighbor who bought his grandma's house. And he was just talking about enlisting in the army. And I'm like, you're out of your fucking mind. That was my advice to him. Renee, go ahead.
Hey, everybody. Always great to be here with you. Yeah, I have a question regarding, you kind of touched upon it yesterday on your profile on X when somebody showed a video of Joe Rogan and Dennis Quaid, I think. And you responded regarding why is nobody kind of talking about the orchestrated front of the Nazi fascism and communism thing. You know, they first, in the timeline, the Bolshevik Revolution, you know, obviously this was plotted and planned a long time before that. And then they kind of swing into China with Mao and then Korea, you know, and it trickles around. And so these countries are considered communist, you know, Cuba, Nicaragua, on and on. And it's like, we've learned a lot about the Operation Gladio, and obviously you've read the most and you ladies have done the most homework. Are there not any whistleblowers or people out there who have tried to expose that this whole communism, fascist thing was the boogeyman front, pawns in the game, as that book is called, to, you know, have world dominance? Are there, you know, or do people who try to expose this or say anything about it, that it was an orchestrated front so they can get their agenda sorted? Or do they just scrub the internet, or they kill these people, or they threaten them, who try and expose that it was not an organic thing to the world?
So you ask a whole bunch of questions there. First of all, that's great. First of all, let me do the last part first, and then the first part will be a little bit longer. The last part is, up until now, anybody that exposed any part of this was murdered. Unequivocally, they were murdered. The first guy in the early 1980s that discovered the network of Operation Gladio in Italy was assassinated, the journalist. The prosecutors that tried to prosecute the people involved in the network were assassinated on court steps. Judges were assassinated. I would argue that Danny Casolaro was onto the quote unquote octopus, the Enterprise. He was murdered. Many of these people who discovered this were murdered. And it is a big disincentive to talk about it if you're going to end up in a body bag. Congressman Leo Ryan discovered what was going on with Jonestown and in San Francisco with the MK Ultra experiment. Probably found out that Jim Jones was part of Operation Gladio. He was in Brazil during the coup there, that the Jonestown was a terrorist training camp for Operation Gladio operatives called Operation Condor in South America. He probably found out most of all of that. And he was assassinated on the tarmac going to investigate that because he was tricked into going down there by one of Jim Jones' disciples. So yeah, it's a big disincentive for talking about it. I'm just going to say, and I don't say this very often, and I don't even say it jokingly anymore, I am not suicidal. But I'm also not going to shut up. The answer to your first question about fascism and communism, I don't know how long you've been with us, so I want to make this perfectly clear. Everything about Operation Gladio is fascist. None of it is communist. It is 100% fascist. Their entire goal, according to the Fabian socialists, was to set up a fascist international order throughout the world, which was what we commonly refer to as one world government. It was to be a fascist one world government. We did not win World War II. all we did was transition World War II from an overt war to a covert war that went around cooing governments in the form of all of these international entities that were set up in the aftermath of World War II. And World War II was fought as an excuse to set the damn things up. We set up the UN, we set up the International Monetary Fund, we set up the World Bank, we set up NATO, we set up the CIA, we set up blah, blah, blah. Every single one of those organizations was to implement Fascist International. Well, in order to do that, you had to create a boogeyman. There were no communists in Nicaragua, none. Okay. There were people that were concerned about workers' rights that were labeled communist. There were no people in the Congo that were communists. There were people who wanted their country back and for their hands not to be cut off when they didn't make enough uranium for the day. The same thing in Chile. None of those people were communist. What the CIA decided was a great tactic is labels. Those people were as much a communist as I am a domestic terrorist. And I've been told I'm a domestic terrorist by my government repeatedly, especially in the last 4 years. I am not a domestic terrorist. I'm a patriot. I'm a veteran. I'm a parent that went to school board meetings. And every single one of those things, the FBI told me I was a terrorist for. And this exact same thing, we are seeing it happen to us, happen to all of them. And for some reason, people, and I just had it happen today on X. Oh, yeah, well, they were communist. Well, are you a domestic terrorist? No. Well, your government just said you were. So if they can tell the whole world in print, so our kids 20 years from now is going to think us that we and Donald Trump was a domestic terrorist. How does that equate to, they didn't just start lying about it. They've been lying the entire fucking time. So we have to go back with Gladio glasses on and kind of dig into the meat of everything that they told us, because it was all a lie. What I have discerned in going back, doing all of that reading into the history of places like Chile, what you find out is these people, like in Chile, they made $87 a year. The people in Nicaragua made less than that. So after the World War II and this big thriving independence movement went around, and supposedly everybody was getting their freedom, which was all a lie as well. A lot of countries started electing people that were going to kick out these international oligarchs from America out of their Latin America countries. They wanted their, like, for example, in Chile, they wanted their telephone company back because the US ITT company was using it to spy on them. And they wanted their mines back because they were stealing all of their copper. And they wanted the rest of their infrastructure back. The same thing happened in Nicaragua. They wanted their farmland back. We today are bitching about China buying our farmland. We bought the entire fucking Latin America. They didn't have any farmland left. And so United Fruit went into Nicaragua and bought almost all of it. And they did it not legitimately, like China's doing. At least they're buying it from the farmers. What they did, well, kind of. Maybe it's the exact same thing now that I said that. What United Fruit did was they actually said, this is an actual quote, that they could buy a congressman, a senator was their word. They could buy a senator cheaper than they could buy a donkey in these countries. So they got crooked land deals and stole people's property, and they used it to farm bananas. That's where Banana Republic came from, as you probably know. And so by doing that, and by the way, when in Nicaragua specifically, when they elected the first guy that was going to take care of their people and not the international syndicate, when he told United Fruit that they had to get out and that he would buy the land back from them, even though they had basically stolen the land, he would buy it back, and he was going to buy it back for $1 million. Well, United Fruit says you can't buy it back for $1 million. It's worth $16 million. And he goes, well, fuck you, because you've only been paying taxes on $1 million for the last 20 years. So that's all you're going to get. Get out. And you know what we did? We killed him. And that was what was done in Iran-Contra. The whole idea of Contra was to create terrorist training camps, Operation Gladio, all around them. We use the Cuban exiles because they're a bunch of Gladio operators that are assassins. We flew them all in. They created and trained all of these people, terrorists, and they went into Nicaragua and overthrew the government. And we did that in almost every Latin America country for an international syndicate oligarch class to be able to go down there and steal their resources. And so I don't know. And I'll be perfectly honest with you. I would love to be able to tell you this, and this was communist, and this, and this wasn't. I don't actually know. What I know is Nicaragua, Chile, the Congo, and the ones that I have investigated, they were not communists. They were labeled a communist so they could use that label to then attack them. And again, when in Nicaragua is such a good example because our military went down and mined their harbor, so they couldn't even trade their coffee and the things that they were capable of producing. They couldn't sell it to the world. They couldn't import the things that they needed because they couldn't get ships in and out. And they did this to attack them on purpose. And so the only thing left, and they know this was a whole plan. Once they cut them off at the IMF, they cut them off at the World Bank, they cut them off at anybody that would trade with them. They isolated them with these stupid sanction bullshit things. So the people down there are starving and they have to reach out to someone. And the only one with enough balls to take on the US at the time and the West was the Soviet Union or Cuba or somebody that had already told them to given them the middle finger. So they would trade with them and try to keep them from starving, the people from starving. And then, of course, as soon as they started trading with the Soviet Union, they got another communist label printed on their back. So this was an entire psyops to convince the American people that the communist boogeyman was right around the corner. There was no communist boogeyman.
Yes, exactly. My husband is Brazilian. His family, by the way, I'm a domestic terrorist according to them as well, but they think it's funny. But in school in Brazil, for example, when they have mandatory, everybody until this day, they study communism and socialism and all this stuff. And he was shocked when he learned that, no, in the United States, we don't learn that. But regardless, thank you
You're welcome.
for all you do. And I can't wait. I mean, wouldn't it be the cherry on top of the Sunday if and when the lies and the labels of this whole communist agenda or the front of the word communism is exposed and everybody realizes the lie that it was.
And I'm not saying that there's no communism. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that the people that were targeted for coups were labeled communists inappropriately in order to target them, just like we were inappropriately labeled domestic terrorists for going to a school board meeting.
Right.
Yeah. So
exactly. Thank you.
Sure.
I
Thank you,
appreciate
Renee.
all you ladies do. Thank you. Have a great weekend, and I will yield.
Sure. The bomb builder, go ahead.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I found you guys. And I'm way behind, but I'm gonna catch up because I think I have some information here that I didn't go into this like as a researcher. I have no military background. I have no like historical background. I kind of went into it with a tinfoil hat and a straitjacket, kind of. And to be on the crazy side, I'm pretty sure that my father, who has been dead for 30 years, came back a year ago and he keeps shoving me down this rabbit hole. So I went and started looking at stuff and you were talking about Chile. Now, we just tried to extradite the Carlos Cardone, right? A couple of years ago, we tried to extradite him back here.
Yeah.
Because I followed that trail and it went all the way to Panama. And I mean, I've been all over the world with this thing and I couldn't make any sense of it. And all of a sudden I was reading one of your threads the other day and I'm like, wait a minute. I know this stuff. But yeah, I've been trying to put this all together and figure out what the heck it was for a year now. I've been down a rabbit hole and I'm telling you, every time I say I'm done, I don't know what I'm looking at. I have no background in this. Something happens my dad shoves me down a rabbit hole, and I just did it about 6 weeks ago. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to give up. I don't know what this is. And then all of a sudden you started showing up on my timeline, and I'm like, thanks, Dad. But yeah, I think my dad's been shoving me down a rabbit hole.
So I have said this to many people, and thank you for speaking up, that all of us, and for me, I am a historian. I have over 600 books. I've read every one of them. I have probably another 20 in the stack. My husband, I just have stacks of books everywhere. I organize everything, and then I keep buying them, and I run out of space again. So once I was able to find the concept of Operation Gladio, it gave me a skeleton. And I'm a concept person, so I will share this because we have so many new people tuning in every day. I envisioned a skeleton like in biology class, and I was able to begin adding the organs to the skeleton to create a body. And that's what Operation Gladio did for me with all of the information I had already gathered. I have 6 different degrees over a wide range of information in different areas. It allowed me to organize every single bit of information that I had into a cohesive concept that was overwhelming. And once I was able to see concretely the skeleton of what Operation Gladio was and how it operated, and I will just share that real quick for all the new people. My vision of Operation Gladio is a wagon wheel, and looks just like the old wagons in the West. And the outside of it is Operation Gladio. The spokes of it, they have 3 spokes: human trafficking, arms trafficking, and drug trafficking. The axle allows the entire thing to roll down the road with a grease called blackmail. And if you look at all of the blackmail operations, we just talked about one, the horizontal, whatever they called it. And that blackmail allows them to purchase oligarchs and congressional members to keep their mouths shut. And then they are allowed to sell their drugs to pay for their paramilitary and all of that. The actual cargo that this wagon wheel is escorting down the road is what I refer to as the international syndicate. That's who's driving the wagon. You have this group of oligarchical criminals that are driving the entire wagon train. And I don't.
Oh, I don't doubt that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I've been looking at.
Yeah, I don't differentiate between who's in that wagon, because at this point, exposing the fact that the wagon exists is the most important part. As we find them, like I did an article on William Pauley, who was one of those people that was in the wagon that no one ever knew. And he was critical to the entire operation. And we will cover him in Asia because he primarily operated in Asia. He was part of the setting up of the World Anti-Communist League. He built the Air Force and bought the shipping capability for Chiang Kai-shek in Taiwan when he was installed in Taiwan to run the drug market. And so he's a very interesting person, and no one's ever heard of him. And so we do expose them occasionally as we go down the road, but I don't focus on them. I want everybody to understand the paramilitary piece of that because that's what my expertise is, and I can explain that the best. So we got a lot of hands. Let's see. Miles, go ahead, and then we're going to go across and talk to everybody down here. Miles?
Okay, thanks, Colonel. I want to go back a little bit. Someone asked about how would someone get involved in this? The pathway to corruption. So you've seen it with different things in your life, like like a child that's not being disciplined, and they start, shoplifting, or you see somebody that may be born in a mafia family, and they start being a runner for the bookies, It doesn't happen overnight, guys. So I'm going to go with like the civil side or the political side. So these people are groomed and they're brought up, and before they know it, they're trapped in this system, and they're compromised. They're not being dealt with on an early level. And we know that if there's intervention early, that you can stop this activity. So I think that woman wanted to know, how do these people get involved in this stuff? And then they keep doing it because there's no repercussions of what they're doing. And they're just elevated higher and higher and higher. And I guess the example I'm trying to put out there is the governor from Minnesota. It was a long process to get him to where he is right now. And he's completely compromised and corrupt. And that's why he's doing what he's doing.
Yeah, that's a good
Thanks,
point.
Carl.
Yeah, that's a good point, Miles. Freedom, go ahead. Freedom, can you unmute your mic?
Hello.
There you go.
Hello, how is everyone?
Good.
Nice to see you. I heard the conversation, and I heard you talking about the CIA and MK Ultra. And the MK Ultra progressed eventually into something called the Hemsing process, or the gateway process. I've completed these tapes, and it basically shows you how they can alter consciousness or use our own manifestation against it. So basically, if you can get enough of humanity to think on the same thought process, then it must manifest into reality. And I've completed the tapes and I can tell you a lot about it, but it takes a long time. But it also teaches you about consciousness and how they can alter stages of consciousness through propaganda and music and things like that. They can also alter your heart rate as well, which lowers your lifespan and also alters your entire blood levels. Like, it's just amazing what they've done. It's devilishly good. So yeah, MK Ultra, basically that was where they used to have to emotionally torture you or physically torture you, and then the Hemsing process, they realized they didn't have to do that if they could emotionally traumatize the entire world, which they did during 9/11 and all the wars preceding that. They can obviously get us in that emotional state or the lower state of consciousness where we are more easily manipulated because we're at that subconscious, I call it, because you've got two states of consciousness, subconscious and supraconscious, or Christ conscious, or enlightenment, or whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to argue about it, but that's how they've managed to win elections and to get everyone on the same destructive thought process that these people are on. And I'm not American. I love America and I love the American people, and I believe we'll all fight for freedom because I'm a lover of God and faith in everyone. So yeah, that's just my input. And I've completed the meditations, and I meditate all the time now because I know the importance of it. But that's just my input, and you just got to be mindful of how they do it. They even try and take your breath, because your breath has a lot to do with your states of consciousness as well. So that's the fear-induced trauma. Induces mouth breathing, which naturally is unhealthy for you. Nose breathing, your nose is the natural filter to your lungs. And if you don't use that correctly, then you're not at homeostasis, because you don't produce something called nitric oxide, which, funny enough, was a Nobel Peace winning prize in 1999, 2 years before 9/11.
Yeah, I've done an entire thread on nitrous oxide. It's an amazing thing that most people have complained, but they do that with our food and everything. They try to basically make us comatose, but those are all great points and very relevant to this entire picture. And again, that's why I try to stay in my own little bucket where I can create an expertise, because as you point out, MK Ultra was another CIA operation, one that I'm not qualified to talk about. And that's the reason why we mention it, because it's important to the overall scheme of, and they do overlap in some cases, like with Jim Jones, where he did both. But I'm not obviously an expert in that. And I do know they've had some fascinating spaces on that subject, and there are some really good experts in that area. But Freedom, you're absolutely right. There is definitely some overlap, and this is so. I will also take that as a springboard to say this. I think when telling people about Operation Gladio and revealing the lies gives people hope. I don't want anybody to come away from this as doom and gloom, saying, oh my God, it's so big, we're never going to defeat this. That is absolutely not true. I can show you distinct things that has happened since Trump came in office that has been happening to expose all of this. We just didn't know the name. They took down an entire drug clan mafia in Southeast Italy. They took down one in Argentina just before their last election. Things are happening. So don't be discouraged, because our vibes do matter. And what I am trying to do is give you information that you can then share with your neighbors, your family, and all of that stuff, so they can understand they're not crazy, as one person said. And this is really, it should be a good news story. But before we get to all of the good news, we got to just explore the history of it. So, Chris, you're next.
Thank you, ma'am. I just wanted to thank you for doing this, for holding these. I follow you on Rumble, but I'm not able to follow anybody here right now. I keep getting timed out after like just adding 3 people. But anyway, I just want to thank you for this. I had to come into it just at my lunchtime, and I will listen to the entire recording, and I just pray God protects you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much.
And
You're welcome.
yeah, and I get up. Somebody was saying, you must be, when you read all of this stuff, it must be really depressing and it actually is not. I get up every morning, probably around 5 o'clock, and like, I am excited every morning when I get up to learn more about this network, about this operation, about what's been going on, and share that with everybody, because I think that the response that I have gotten is finally, it's all making sense to me. And it does make every minute that I spend doing this, maybe not to my husband, but to me, it makes every minute worth it. So, Martin
Well, I
Bott.
appreciate you.
Oh.
I just wanted to say, yes, we should be excited to learn the truth in every area of life. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Chris. Martin Bott. I'm not even going to try to. Hey, there you go.
So I think the thing that has to be worked on is what Germany is doing since 1945, right? That the United States landed in Normandy, Germany decided that something has to happen. And so the idea was to divert the Allies. And one lever to do so was the communist base in the US. Germany had a gigantic network of spies in the US, which is not been secret actually. That was already happening or operative in World War I. The idea was to keep the United States out of Europe in World War I. The same was true for World War II. And after the war, Germany reorganized this network. They even took over a lot of spies from Italy. And then they caused this communist base in the United States. Everyone who was not against Germany immediately was a communist, right? And that's how Germany got all the good guys out of the system. And this has to be understood. The work, the undercover work of of Germany destroying the United States and the society there. Thank you.
Thank you. Bridget, go ahead.
I just wanted to let everybody know that I posted a link up in the billboard, the last link, I should say, that is a link to all of our other spaces, past spaces, and that has been put together, and they're all labeled by regions. And that way, if you need to catch up, it also has a link there in that to all of the kernels, or I think all of them, all the threads, in case you need to catch up. It's also pinned right below her profile. Because we know that, sometimes you guys just, catch one and it's like, wow, I wish I had heard the rest of it. So there it is. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Renee, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, one more thing. I guess on the bright side, like what you said, you get excited when you wake up. I kind of do as well. And everything you ladies have shared in perspective, it seems like, the world was, prior to learning all this, the world was going to hell in a handbasket. But now that we know that, there's bad guys creating all this terrorism and these fronts and these names and everything. And without them, our world probably won't be so bad because it was not an organic, all of this crazy, horrible stuff that has happened throughout history
was never organic. Yeah, it was never, it was never organic.
Yeah, and learning this is kind of the reward of like, oh my gosh, humans aren't that bad. It's just these crazy psychos that did all this shit.
And that's Renee, you captured it in a nutshell. That's their worst fear, is us realizing it's not us, it's them. Then we all unite and they're done forever. That is the key to everything.
100%.
Very well said. Very well said. Miles, go ahead.
Yeah, I know you want to close the space down, but on my timeline, guys, I put in a really interesting video by Alpha News, which is different than Alpha Warrior, but in Minneapolis about the Summer of Love. Now, if you look at the headline, I'm saying, well, if they could do this back then, why aren't they doing it now? Now, I know the year's not over, but the summer's starting to wind down. So you might want to look at that, because I found it very interesting that a liberal photographer, because he grew up in Europe and he saw the same things starting to happen in Minneapolis. And even him, at the end, he goes, wait a minute, this stuff is not organic, this is planned. And we talk about, the good guys, they're anti-communist. Well, Antifa was in Minneapolis, and they were here ahead of time before the event started. They were in a tent city, just waiting for something to happen, I guess. So you might want to watch that little 22-minute video, and just to have someone from the other side start to figure it out, because he grew up in Europe around this, and his dad was a photographer. So it's actually a nice little piece to explain that certain things aren't happening that they want to do, and they're not doing them right now for some reason. I don't know. We'll figure that out later. But it's really interesting. A lot of people didn't know that I was paying very close attention to what was happening in Minneapolis, because I live here. And I was doing a lot of research. Now, a lot of people don't realize they burned down 894 buildings. It's like there weren't 894 buildings in that area. So they were burning down stuff all over the city for, reasons that haven't come out in a court yet, obviously. But you might want to check that out. Thanks, Colonel, for doing that.
Thanks, Miles. No problem. All right. Martin Bot, what you got?
Now, you can see them training in Germany. I've seen the Antifa being trained here in Germany since 1999, and it was happening even before. But when I was going public with my internet site, and I went to Berlin on 1st of May and had a look what they were doing there, what to inform them, and I figured out they were all working for the deep state, right? That's really interesting what you can see. Also, half a year before they stormed the parliament in Washington, they made an exercise in Berlin, Germany, and stormed the Reichstag, or just stopped in front of the door, because they didn't want to cause any damage. But that was obviously a test run. You see all these, what's happening abroad, being prepared in Germany, or much of it, they were close to. And you have a lot of people being trained here from abroad in method of subversion and political terror and so on. I've seen, I was in Portugal in 1999, January, February, and they were training the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the German Secret Service, was training people from Ukraine in gang-stalking style political persecution. But that's 25 years ago. And the same as what happened in Maidan. That was also very well steered by Germany, I guess. Because Germany was infiltrating and subverting Ukraine for about 20 years. So, yeah. You always look for the German link, and then you will understand. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everybody, we're at 6 o'clock. That's quitting time. I appreciate everybody being here. Please repost this space so everybody gets it and we can get new people in here, just like we saw today. I'm glad everybody's here, and I promise we're going to close out Korea on Monday. I have one more piece of information that I want to share with you guys that kind of rounds out the background a little better, and then we're going to move forward with Vietnam. So anyway, God bless you all. Have a great weekend, and we'll be back here on Monday. See you then. Stop it. Crazy dog. You're a crazy dog. Why are you biting my hands? All right, come on. Come on. You got to come up here and say goodbye to everybody. Yeah, you got to come up here and say goodbye to everybody. You can come say goodbye. We're going to go off the air. Come on. Oh, get up here. Say goodbye to everybody. Yeah, say goodbye. There you are. Do you see yourself? Look right there. Who is that? Right here. Look right here. There you are. Do you see yourself? No, right here. Right here. Hey, look right here. There you are. He doesn't see himself. You guys have a nice weekend too. I will see you on Monday.